Little Toot by Hardy Grammetry. At the foot of an old wharf lived the cutest, silliest little tugboat you ever saw. His name is Little Toot because, blow hard as he would, the only sound from his whistle was a small toot toot toot. But what he couldn't create in sound, Little Toot made up for in smoke. From his chubby smokestack he sent up a volley of smoke balls. That made Little Toot feel very important, and the flag at his masthead would dance like the tail of a puppy dog. Now, the river where Little Toot lives is full of ships. They come from parts all over the world, so there is always work for tugboats to do, either pushing ships into the docks to be unloaded or pulling them to the ocean to begin a new voyage. Little Toot was right in the middle of it all. His father, Big Toot, is the biggest and fastest tugboat on the river. And as for Grandfather Toot, he is an old sea dog who tells of his mighty deeds on the river. But Little Toot hated work. He was scared of the wild seas outside the channel. He had no desire to be tossed around or pull ships 50 times bigger than himself. He preferred the calm water of the river, where he could always find plenty of fun, like gliding, for example, or playing thread the needle around the piers, or cutting figure eights. Little Toot loved making really big figure eights. Little Toot's antics annoyed the hard-working tugboats awfully. One day he made a figure eight so big it took up the whole river. There was no room at all for a big tug named J.G. Mythology, who was bound downstream. He had little love for other tugboats, and a frivolous one like Little Toot made him mad. The other tugboats saw what happened, and they made fun of him, saying he only knew how to play. Poor Little Toot. He was ashamed and angry, but there was nothing he could do about it except blow these silly smoke balls. Little Toot hid alongside the wharf and sulked. Then he saw a great ocean liner heading down the river. Pulling it were 4 tugboats with his own father, Big Toot, right up in front. All of a sudden, a great idea burst over him. He wouldn't be a silly, frivolous little tugboat anymore. He would work like the rest of them. He would make Big Toot proud of him. Full of ambition, Little Toot started downstream. He sidled hopefully up to one big ship after another, tooting for them to heave a tow line. But they supposed he was still only a nonsense and would have nothing to do with him. Oscar, the stranded villain, rudely blew steam in his face. But the rudest of all was a great transatlantic liner. It blasted him right out of the water. That was too much for Little Toot. He wasn't wanted any more by anyone. He was so lonesome. Floating aimlessly downstream, he grew sadder and sadder. He didn't even notice the sky had grown dark and the wind was whippling up into a real storm. Suddenly, he heard a sound, It was like no sound he had ever heard before. It was the ocean, and the noise came from the waves as they dashed and pounded against the rocks. But that wasn't all. Against the black sky climbed a brilliant flaming rocket. When little Toot looked hard, he saw, jammed between two huge rocks, an ocean liner. What a terrible thing to see! Little Toot went wild with excitement. He began puffing those silly balls of smoke out of his smokestack. And then a wonderful thought struck him. Why, those smoke balls could probably be seen way up the river where his father and grandfather were. So he puffed the signal. Way up the river they saw it. Of course they had no idea who was making the signals, but they knew it meant come quickly, so they all raced to the rescue. Just in time, too, because little Toot, still puffing out his SOS, was hard put to stay afloat. One wave spun him around. Another tossed him up high. Out of the corner of his eye, when he was hung on a wave, little Toot saw the fleet wasn't able to make headway against such fierce seas. Little Toot was scared green, but something had to be done. The fleet was on the verge of giving up when suddenly, above the storm, they heard a familiar toot. It was little Toot, not wasting his strength butting the waves as they had done, but bouncing from crest to crest like a rubber ball. The pounding hurt like everything, but little Toot kept right on going. Looking through his binoculars, Big Toot saw the great vessel throw a line to little Toot. When the line was made fast, little Toot waited for a long moment. And then, when a huge wave swept under the liner, lifting it clear up the rocks, little Toot pulled with all his might. The liner came free! The people on board began to cheer, and the whole tugboat fleet insisted on little Toot's escorting the great boat back into the harbor. Little Toot was a hero, and Grandfather Toot blasted the news all over the river. Well, after that, little Toot became quite a different fella. He even changed his tune, and it is said that he can haul as big as a load as his father can. That is, when Big Toot hasn't a very big load to haul. The end.